My name is Shelley Bork and I work on the asset management team at Minnesota Housing. Today I'm going to talk about operating guidance for properties that have units designated for long-term homeless households. Our mission at Minnesota Housing is to provide access to safe, decent, and affordable housing and build on stronger communities across the state. It has a national reputation as one of the finest housing finance agencies in the country and has built an enduring alliance among partners in the for-profit, nonprofit, and government sectors to achieve its mission. Minnesota Housing supports the development and preservation of affordable housing through both financing and the long-term asset management. It has pioneered a successful model for supportive housing that helps stabilize the lives of some of the most vulnerable citizens of our state. This operating guidance for long-term homeless households was created to assist the owner, the management agent, and the supportive service staff to successfully house LTH households. It provides some strategies and recommendations which many of you have shared with us to make some successful practices occur. I'm going to go over a few key points from this guidance in the areas of tenant selection, lease-up, and overall monitoring requirements. The Minnesota Housing website provides further details of this guidance that you may find useful after this presentation. Tenant selection. This is determined and described by your tenant selection plan. The tenant selection plan should be established well in advance of the unit lease-up and must be reviewed by Minnesota Housing. Furthermore, Minnesota Housing does not formally approve or disapprove of tenant selection plans. This is the role of the owner and the management agent to approve. And Minnesota Housing's role is to assist in offering comments and recommendations only. It is highly recommended that the owner and the agent seek legal counsel as needed to ensure that their tenant selection plan doesn't show any red flags in the areas of fair housing. Reviewing of your funding sources can also assist in the creation of your tenant selection plan. This, along with review of your legal documents for important identifiers to include in your tenant selection plan. For example, rent and income limits and the dedicated number of LTH units the owner has agreed to serve. All efforts must be made to ensure that the LTH units are leased to eligible households as defined in your legal documents. The tenant selection planning criteria should include reasonable criteria that consider the past histories and barriers of this unique population. Your plan should cover what's acceptable in the areas of housing history, income limits, rent limits, credit history, and criminal records. Waitlist management should also be addressed, as well as reasonable accommodations. For example, you will want to consider the multiple barriers of this population and what would definitely deny someone from the housing and what may just be a maybe from somebody getting into the housing. You will want to include the service provider in this process from the start to the finish. They will be very helpful in identifying the barriers and how to address them in the tenant selection plan. For example, if you have a Section 8 property that you are adding long-term homeless households to, you will want to include a preference into your tenant selection plan and how your waitlist process will work. Minnesota Housing staff can also assist with this process unique to your situation. For reasonable accommodations, it is important that this be included as a provision in your tenant selection plan. Again, the importance of including the service provider who should be in the know of every step on creating your tenant selection plan. You should work together to make sure that you can have a successful tenant selection plan for the long-term homeless population you are trying to serve. Tenant lease-up. This should be identified in your marketing plan, tenant selection plan, MOU, or any like agreement outlining the details of the plan to accomplish leasing. Please consult with your Minnesota Housing staff to develop a plan that is appropriate for your unique housing model. The lease-up schedule should be discussed prior to occupancy and agreed upon by all partners, and consider the total number of units at the development as compared to the total number of LTH units. When leasing the LTH units, it is recommended that the lease-up of the units be staggered or phased in to ensure that the dynamics and culture of the development is not abruptly impacted, as well as a smooth transition for new tenants. This approach will depend on the supportive housing model, your target population, and whether it is a new development that is being built or a rehab. Clear roles should be defined for the service provider and the management agent on how to refer and process LTH households. The MOU can further spell out this important step. The MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding, is viewed as the foundation document defining the roles in the partnership for all the parties for the housing to operate. You may notice that the MOU and tenant selection plan may have crossover in many areas of these processes we are talking about today. That is okay, because all documents are integral for the clear understanding on how processes will work and who you are serving. Minnesota Housing staff can assist you as needed. Monitoring requirements. Minnesota Housing requires specific monitoring requirements for units funded as LTH. There are Minnesota Housing long-term homeless verification forms that must be used and maintained in the tenant files. We know that most of the time it is the service provider that assists in the LTH verification process. However, the management agent or owner is expected to maintain a copy of the LTH verification in the tenant file and have this available for staff review. It's also important to note that the LTH forms periodically do get updated, so please visit our website for the most up-to-date form. HMIS reporting is also required, and this process is set up prior to the LTH occupancy with the assistance of Minnesota Housing supportive staff. An annual survey. This is initiated by Minnesota Housing with the intent to have both property management and service provider input to how the housing is operating. We use this information to glean opportunities and learning more about your particular housing model that can better assist other providers as well as staff in their housing practices for this population. A year-end operating or financial report is also required. The owner or agent is responsible for submitting to the agency. This can be an audit as required by Minnesota Housing, or a copy of another funder's audit is also appropriate as needed. Please see your Minnesota Housing staff or management officer to review further direction on this. Site inspections. Typically, Minnesota Housing visits the property for monitoring within the first year of closing of the funding. You will be contacted by the assigned housing management officer to arrange the site visit, and where details and expectations of the visit will be explained. In general, we will want to know how the LTH households are operating and integrating at the property, and if these households are living stably in the setting. You will have the opportunity for dialogue at the site visits. There are multiple housing models we see and work with every day, and in doing so, have the privilege of being exposed to a wide array of approaches and challenges and working with many customers who serve the long-term homeless population. Let's discuss vacancy of an LTH unit. First, the owner has committed, pursuant to the legal documents, that they will serve a designated number of assisted LTH units. Every effort must be made to lease to an LTH eligible household that were committed by the owner. The service provider and the management agent should work together on effective outreach and approaches. The service provider typically manages the referral sources to locate eligible households who are in need of this housing, and coordinated assessment is a part of this process. Coordinated assessment planning is new and is underway throughout the state for coordinating referrals so that eligible households will come from a centralized wait list in each region. Your service provider should be aware of this process and is hopefully participating in the local discussion with the COC or Continuum of Care group in your area. Contact Minnesota Housing staff with any further questions. If after 60 days the unit remains vacant, it may be rented to the next income-eligible non-LTH unit. We realize that we do not want the property to incur a financial liability having the unit open too long. Minnesota Housing must be notified if this occurs. Staff must document leasing efforts and marketing efforts should be ongoing and in collaboration to ensure that households are targeted to the specific number of assisted LTH units. The key for tenant retention and housing stability is good communication between all parties. Make sure you have proper releases that are signed with residents so information can be shared between all parties about each of the LTH households. Regular meetings should occur, and again, however it can work for you to outline how this will work in your MOU or other agreements. Remember, supportive service staff cannot share privileged client information due to ethics issues. Developing a strong relationship up front between all parties will create a smooth environment for good communication, and this will be paramount to your overall success. Respect is also needed and to be acknowledged between all parties due to the individual roles. Supportive services is the advocate for the tenant, and management agent has the role of steward for the owner and the asset. The MOU is also a useful tool. It can be revised to meet the needs of the parties to address common trends and issues. If you need to change some particular area in your MOU due to process or procedure, that's okay. Minnesota Housing may request an updated MOU as needed. Determining ongoing trends and issues is key, and they may need to be revised or revisited in your MOU as you experience and operate the housing. Networking with other housing providers, reviewing police reports or incident reports, and meeting often between the parties of services and management agent can make sure that you have a good communication process that keeps on top of problems or concerns at your development. This concludes our tutorial. For further questions, contact Shelley Bork or Tina Rogney or visit our website, and thank you for watching.